Okay, welcome everybody. This is the morning plenary today for the How Class Works Conference for 2012. Let me just begin with a few housekeeping announcemements. I'm Michael Zweig, the director of the Center for Study of Working Class Life here. I want to welcome everybody to the conference and to the events here today. In your registration packet, you will find some information. In particular, you'll see a rata sheet or an addendum or something, whatever we call it, for the program that lists some cancellations and some changes. I just want to add addenda to the addenda. There are two other people who are in the program who cannot be with us. Andrea Hill in session 8.3 and Max Remo in session 8.7 today will not be with us, so be advised. For those of you who are coming to the banquet tonight, we hope that everybody will who's paid for the conference. You really do need to bring these name tags, and you will see on the name tag that there is a little dot. Mine is red. That means I'm going to eat beef tonight. If you have a green dot, you are a vegetarian for purposes of tonight's meal. And if you have a yellow dot, that means you're going to have chicken for dinner, whatever form it comes. You need to have this badge so that they will know what order, because they have actually made meals according to the dots that are on your badge. So it's important that you bring the badge, and they're going to look and see what kind of meal you're getting, and that's what you're getting. So that, if anybody found a cell phone last night, somebody did mislay a cell phone, which everybody here knows how important that is to get that back. So if you did find one, please let me know, or take it up to the registration table outside. For those who are here with a travel grant from the Working Class Studies Association, Cherry Rankin, who is in the back there, Cherry, right there, stand up. She has the checks, and you should see Cherry. So also in your registration packet, you will see that there is a campus bookstore that has been moved as a satellite store upstairs on the 3rd floor. All the sessions, except the plenary sessions and the banquet tonight, are on the 3rd floor of this building. There's a hallway that has classrooms on both sides of that hallway. Everything is up there. So that makes it convenient and concise. You can go back and forth, you can check things out. And one of the rooms there is a bookstore that has books by the presenters and other titles that may be interesting to you. So I encourage you to go to that bookstore in room, I think it's 309. And then the Center for Study of Working Class Life also has a store in room 312 where we have wonderful posters, signed posters by Milton Rogovin, and also some wonderful work from Ralph Fasanella, and then the DVDs and pamphlets that our center has published on Afghanistan, Iraq, the Iraq Labor Solidarity Tour, and a pamphlet by Jack Odell, and also by Ted Allen. So I do encourage you to check those stores out, and they're discount prices for conference goers. So we come to the main event for this morning, which is our discussion, and I guess y'all can come up here. We have the Occupy movement, of course, is very well understood. I mean, not well understood, but understood to be extremely important around the country. We were thinking about how to address the question of the Occupy movement. You'll see in the program that there are several sessions that deal with it. The history, historical analogies, other aspects of it, the Take Back the Land movement. There are other ways in which we're dealing with this, but we did think that it deserved a full plenary discussion for everybody to consider. And we thought that the way best to do this, it would be to cooperate with the Joseph S. Murphy Center for Labor Education and Worker Education, Labor Studies, in New York City, part of the City University of New York. And our center and as for study of working class life and the Murphy Institute have done a lot of stuff together over the years, and we're very, very pleased that we were able to put this panel together really through the Murphy Institute. And what we decided to do was to look at the question of the Occupy movement through the lens of a particular event, the May Day mobilization in New York City, and try to analyze and sum up what were the dynamics in that might teach us something about the Occupy movement, its relation to the labor movement, its relation to the community and community movements, which all those strands and all those threads came together to pull off a very, very substantial march and a rally in New York City on May Day, which did not, of course, get the media coverage that it deserved. So the person who really pulled the session together and is going to chair it and run it is Penny Lewis, who is on the faculty at the Joseph S. Murphy Institute at CUNY. And we have also Thisanjali Gangoda, Amy Muldoon, and Teresa Gutierrez. I just heard that Nasran Mohit has to be away today. She has some other obligation that no one else could do that she must do. So she is not here and will not be here today. But without any further ado, I turn it over to Penny Lewis.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me out there? Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Mike, very much and all the organizers of the conference for asking the Murphy Institute, let me just get this right, for asking the Murphy Institute to help organize this plenary. Thank all of you for being here this early in the morning, and I also want to thank ahead of time our panelists for taking the time out of their busy lives to be here with us today. As Mike just said, we are here to reflect on and draw lessons from the recent coalitional efforts in New York City of Occupy Wall Street, labor unions, the May 1st Coalition for Worker and Immigrant Rights, and other immigrant rights groups in the city that organized for May Day this year. And we're doing this in the shadow of an electoral defeat in Wisconsin, the failed recall of Governor Scott Walker on Tuesday, which I think should throw into sharper focus the urgency of the questions that our speakers are going to be exploring today. Namely, what is the strength and the future of the collaborative efforts of today's movements, Occupy, community, and labor? And because I don't want to only frame this in light of the grim news from Wisconsin, we should also hail a victory this week in New York of locked out Teamsters, art handlers at Sotheby's, which is great news, who are returning to work this week after, I think it's 41 weeks of a lockout, is that right? Here, the union's efforts were consistently bolstered by Occupy, by solidarity actions from Occupy. And I think if we want to look at how to build from the bottom up, we need to be thinking about the different models and strategies for grassroots mobilizations that are being created in the collaborations that we're looking at today, and our speakers will help us reflect on this. I'm just going to spend a few minutes giving you a brief background on the May Day Coalition in New York, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers. So for those of you who have not been intimately involved in Occupy New York, Occupy Wall Street, from its earliest days, there's been a great deal of interpenetration of this new movement and New York City's labor movement and community organizations and activists. Some of the core activists who organized the first General Assemblies in New York, who created the early working groups, and who even camped out at Zuccotti, came from backgrounds as labor and community organizers. And many more with such connections and experiences joined with Occupy as the weeks went by. New York unions in particular offered material support, and the two biggest Occupy demonstrations of the fall were both, each with tens of thousands of participants, were called by coalitions with unions and community groups at their center. Perhaps most importantly, and what we will be focusing on here today in part, is the new energy that Occupy Wall Street brought to labor and community organizing in New York. So in the New York context, Occupy has thus far both been its own movement, but one that has also moved in and out of other formal movement organizations in New York. Many of us who've worked in solidarity with, as opposed to part of, Occupy, and I consider myself to be one of those people, have been incredibly excited to see the amazing energy that this new movement has breathed into our existing groups. And movement activists, Occupy or not, have been committed to seizing the opportunity created by Occupy to build all of our movements. So the May Day coalition that formed this past winter was not starting from scratch. Connections between the groups and individuals had been fostered in the weeks, months, and in some cases years before. But the May Day coalition nevertheless struck everyone involved as a significant step forward. As I'm sure everyone in this room knows, May Day is International Labor Day, but it has gone largely uncelebrated in the United States, its birthplace since the Cold War. In 2006, immigrant rights groups, whose members are largely coming from countries where May Day continues to be recognized as a labor rights day, came out by the millions to demand immigrant rights in the United States, and subsequently May Day has had this dual focus of worker and immigrant rights. But in recent years, New Yorkers have had two May Day events to choose from. Both are focused on immigrant rights, but one was held in one part of the city at Foley Square and the other at Union Square. The groups did not come together. But this year, with Occupy's emergence and participation, everybody committed to working together. The coalition that formed called itself internally, the May Day Coalition, called itself internally the 4x4. That is, people working within Occupy, labor, immigrant rights, and the long-standing immigrant rights coalition, the May 1st Coalition. While lots of individuals wore numerous hats, representatives from each met regularly for months to plan the common focus of the day, which was a rally and march from Union Square. And all of our panelists were intimately involved with this work. In addition to working together collectively, each side of the 4x4 worked to plan their own activities, which included weeks of picketing, actions, teach-ins, speak-outs, both leading up to the day and on the day itself. Which you might hear about from some of our speakers. How many of us here today participated in some kind of May Day event wherever we were? Looks like about half. And how many of you were actually at Union Square or the march and rally there? Oh, so not very many. Well, it was from my perspective, an absolutely amazing day. It was the largest May Day event that we've had in my history in New York, certainly. And there were approximately 30,000 people there, which is about 3 times more than there have been in recent years. So today we're using that day as an opportunity, as Mike said, to assess these coalitional efforts. And these are some of the questions that our panelists are going to touch on. So what are these movements learning from each other? How are they working together? What's working? What's not? What kind of power do each of these movements have and hold, both separately as well as together? How do you define a successful May Day? And was May Day itself a success? For example, there were calls for a general strike around the country. How do you measure what happened that day in light of that kind of yardstick? And perhaps most importantly, looking ahead, what lessons have been learned from this recent collaboration for future coalitional efforts? As Mike said, Nasrin Mohi could not be with us today, and that's unfortunate, and she sends her regrets. But I'm going to now just introduce the panelists. Each of them is going to speak for 10 or so minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for discussion. Teresa Gutierrez, who is going to be our first speaker. She is the co-coordinator of the May 1st Coalition for Workers and Immigrant Rights. And she's also the national coordinator of Latin America immigrants projects of the International Action Center. And Teresa came to us universally recommended as a speaker for this plenary because of the central and consistent role that she played in making May Day happen in New York City. And also keeping immigrant rights at the forefront of Occupy's mind in the process. Tishi Gangoda moved to New York City from Ohio last fall to participate in in the New York Union Semester program at the Joseph Murphy Institute. And I will just put in a plug for all of you that you should invite your students to come participate in Union Semester, or you yourself should, and send people our way, because it's an amazing program. She is now working at 1199 SEIU in new organizing as a researcher, and she's also continuing on doing her master's studies at Murphy. She is keen on developing her praxis around the idea that strong people don't need strong leaders, which is why she's very active in the Occupy Wall Street Immigrant Worker Justice Working Group. Our last speaker is going to be Amy Muldoon, who is a 12-year veteran repair technician at Verizon in Queens, where she is currently working without a contract. She was hired by CWA, Communication Workers of America, her union, District 1, as an Occupy liaison in November, and she has participated in the rank and file, labor outreach, and May Day planning working groups. She has an article coming out called Zuccotti at Work, Daydreams of a Rank and Filer, which is going to be in the upcoming New Politics. And she has numerous articles on the Verizon contract, the labor movement, and radical history that can be found at socialistworker.org. So these are our three speakers, and I will ask Teresa to come up. I'll give you a sign about 10 minutes or 8 minutes.
Buenos días. Oh, I broke it. Buenos días. Okay. Well, good morning, sisters and brothers. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about what happened recently in New York around May Day. In the spring of 2006, not just once, but several times, millions of immigrants took to the streets in record numbers. Out of the shadows, millions of workers poured out in protest of the Sensenbrenner legislation that attempted to criminalize immigrants. And those millions, I must emphasize, came out not just once, but in several times, several demonstrations throughout that spring. They came out in cities across the country, cities such as Las Vegas, that held some of the largest demonstrations that that city had ever seen, ever. And you fast forward to 2012, however, since this mass upsurge, and a vicious and racist campaign against immigrant workers, especially the undocumented, has swept the country. It is a tsunami of injustice. Yet in response, there has been little outcry outside of the immigrant communities, an example of the times that we are living. Over 165 cities and many states have passed terrifying legislation, copycats of Arizona's SB 1070. Arizona, which smacks of Nazi Germany, has even banned books, especially those that are related to Chicano history, including those of a Pulitzer Prize winner. Many an immigrant family has been torn asunder. Children have been left unattended as a result of deportations. If you are Latino, Muslim, or Caribbean, as an example, and your car has a broken taillight, if you get stopped by a cop in Alabama or Georgia and now in New York, it may mean that you will enter the dismal world of Corrections Corporation of America. And good luck if you get sick while in detention, because you may die as guards laugh at your suffering. Too many mothers in Mexico or Honduras will never know what happened to their sons or daughters if their child is one of the thousands of undocumented who have died on the U.S.-Mexican border as a result of the militarization of the border. Thousands of human bones have been found that will never be identified. And I say that the blood of every single one of those human beings is on the hands of the 1%. Since the 2008 presidential election, over 1.5 million immigrants have been deported. Imagine walking into the city of Dallas one morning and there's no one in that city. That's about what is happening in the immigrant community. 1.5 million people have been deported. Today in this country, of Latinos who vote, 1 in 4 knows someone in deportation proceedings. Clearly, the current situation for immigrant workers, especially the undocumented, is one of the greatest tragedies of U.S. history. So when the Occupy Wall Street movement decided to take May Day as its next major step, this was a welcome development for many in the immigrant rights movement. What ensued was historic. It was a coalition of labor, immigrant, and progressive groups that came together with the Occupy Wall Street movement in one table to organize May Day. From January or so to May of this year, New York City saw something unique. Hours of meetings, discussions, debates, many new faces and organizations getting to know one another. It was not perfect. It was not easy. It was sometimes frustrating and hard. And not every immigrant group was favorable to this alliance. And many, as a matter of fact, decided not to come to Union Square for the first time since 2006. Many of that was for fear that the state and the Bloomberg administration that had come down on occupied Wall Street at Zuccotti and so forth, that something would happen on May Day, and so they decided to stay, many immigrant groups decided to stay in their communities. But nonetheless, what resulted was awesome. It was about 30,000 people marching from Union Square to Wall Street, and the lead slogan that everyone agreed to that was actually developed by an Occupy Wall Street youth was legalize, organize, and unionize. That was one of the main banners slogans that we all came together around. Now, there's a lot to be said about this important and very historic demonstration. And I want to emphasize a couple of points in my final few minutes. The immigrant rights movement, in the wake of the horrific attacks that I mentioned, really needed a boost in the current period. The community is beaten down. There's some wonderful organizing efforts still going on. There's a lot of solidarity, but not incommensurate with the attacks. So that boost was needed, and it came from the Occupied Wall Street movement. It needed the help of the OWS movement, and it got it. Let me point out that our coalition, as Penny mentioned, has been organizing since 2006. The May 1st Coalition was actually formed around the fact that immigrants wanted to march on May Day in 2006, and some unions, many unions, didn't want to march on May Day in 2006. And this is important to point out. In 2006, May Day was sort of still seen by many in the labor movement as the Red Day, the Communist Day. And many unions pulled out of the coalitions that were formed in 2006. Many came as individuals, but they didn't come as in the names of their unions. And so our coalition, that's when it formed under those conditions. And 2 or 3 years ago, some labor activists who wanted to revive May Day as well had another demonstration separate from Union Square at Foley Square. And, you know, it's always best to try to come together and have one demonstration if you're fighting the same, more or less the same goals and the same slogans. And so in LA, at one point, there were 7 demonstrations on May Day, just to show you how difficult building unity is. At least in New York, we only had 2 separate demos, right? But there was efforts. There was efforts within our coalition, and there was efforts in the labor movement to try to fix this up. And that's a huge thing when people are trying to have one solid demo. So the year before, 2011, there was a lot of coalition building, and there were still 2 demos, but what resulted in 11 was that our coalition agreed to march to Foley Square, and the Foley Square and Union Square forces had a joint closing demonstration. And so that was a big step forward. This year, as a result of, I mean, we really have to give the Occupy Wall Street movement a lot of credit. As a result of the Occupy Wall Street movement, there was no question that there would be only one demonstration, and there was not 2 demonstrations like there had been in 10 and 11. And so already that's a contribution that the Occupy Wall Street movement made to the effort to organize May Day, and that's important. And so even though as I said, the immigrant rights movement needed the OWS movement, but the OWS movement also needed the immigrant rights movement as well. And so I want to touch a little bit on my final comments about some of these meetings. When the Occupy Wall Street movement in late December or so decided that it was going to use May Day as its next jumping point, they formed a May Day working group, and some of us in the May 1st Coalition decided that we had better, get in touch with them. They got in touch with us, and so we started going to the May Day meetings. And it was really quite incredible to see that there was at least 150 people at each meeting, and keep in mind that they were meeting twice a week. I mean, who has time to go to 2 meetings of 150, but they have time. And so we had to make time. So there was, 2 meetings twice a week to discuss May Day. There were the most interesting debates ever. The first major debate was whether the OWS movement wanted to call for a general strike. And some of us with gray hair or some of us in the labor movement were saying, well, you can't disagree with the idea of calling for a general strike. I mean, damn it, it's time. We need it. We can't be, it's time to have that kind of fight back. But were the conditions there? Can you really call for a general strike if the unions are not going to support it? What's the point? Who would come out? And so there was these very intense discussions with them where many of us would say, it's not the time. It's not the time. And so they agreed that we would organize under another banner. And so as one of the complications, though, is that, even throughout mobilizing under the banner of legalized, organized, and unionized, you would still see literature being put out by somebody in OWS to call for a general strike. So that was interesting. That was an interesting, development. You thought you had not agreed to that, but yet you saw a lot of literature. So it just shows you the complexities of this movement. And there was one other thing that's really struck out, especially to those activists of color. 300 people would come to a weekly meeting of the OWS May Day Working Group, and 95% of the people in that room were white. New York is a color of city. It is a city that is Black and Latino and Asian primarily. No matter what the Bloomberg statistics are, New York City is a city of oppressed people. And those meetings were primarily white, privileged youth. And the better elements understood that that was a problem, and that if you were going to win against the 1%, you really needed to, try to fix that up. And the way that the OWS movement oriented to May Day shows that this is a movement that is to be reckoned with. It shows that it's a movement that is very complex, not homogeneous, all over the place in some ways, but that it oriented to the working class around May Day is a huge step forward. And that they attempted not to step on the toes of immigrants who had revived May Day in '06. And this year's May Day was not the largest May Day in a long time. It was one of the smallest ones, because do not forget that '06 New York City May Day demonstration was several thousands. Some people even say it could have been 500,000 in New York City. I don't know, it's hard to tell, but it was huge. It was a huge demonstration. And the May Day this year is nothing compared to '06. And this is important to note, because in many of the articles that have come out by the progressive press, I read one article in Truth Out, for example, that talked about how May Day was the largest upsurge in the United States in decades. This is not true. The largest upsurge was in '06. And this almost becomes a little racist. It's like when brown people march, it's not considered anything, And this is important as we grapple with unity. Of course, the demonstrations in '06 and all the immigrant rights struggle, if the immigrant rights movement is going to be successful, it must be multinational. It needs labor, it needs all allies of all nationalities. We need to march together under one banner for our rights, against foreclosures and so forth and so on. But nonetheless, what happened in '06 was extremely important. And the OWS movement is not going away. We are now discussing our next steps together. We are united in marching on June 17th at the important silent march against stop and frisk. This is very important. 500,000 black and brown youth are being stopped by the New York police every year. There's a demonstration, the OWS movement and the immigrant rights movement and others are mobilizing for this demonstration. This is a sign that this coalition is attempting to stay together. Many of us are talking about organizing against the Democratic National and Republican National Conventions in September to take, demonstrations there. And so I want to end by just saying that as an old activist, I am extremely encouraged by what we see in the Occupy Wall Street movement upsurge. Many times we said that history was made on September the 17th at Zuccotti Park. Many of those youth thought that history started on September 17th. But when you tell them, yes, history was made on September 17th, but history didn't begin on September 17th. Well, the youth that are listening to that, the youth that want to build allies with other coalitions, are spearheading the Occupied Wall Street movement. And so we should all be very encouraged by what happened at Zuccotti Park in September. And we should be very encouraged about what happened in May Day this year. And I promise you that May Day next year is going to be even more righteous. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Good morning. This mic is a little tricky. Can everyone hear me? Hi, my name is Thisanjali Gangoda, but I go by Tishi, and I just want to say thank you to the organizer of this panel, to Penny Lewis and to Michael Zweig and to the folks who organize the How Class Works conference. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about my involvement in Occupy, in May Day, and I also, in being in this panel, I think it's wonderful that the organizers recognize the strength and the radical nature of women and understanding that women have been really involved and influential in radical movements throughout history. So I really, really sincerely appreciate that because in a lot of spaces, especially in left organizations, it's a struggle for women of color in particular to really have their voices heard. So it's really exciting to be here. So I want to start talking about my initial involvement with Occupy. I moved to New York City in August to participate, like Penny said, in the New York Union semester at the Joseph Murphy Institute for Labor Studies. And my arrival in New York City happened to just coincide with the inception of Occupy. And I didn't know about it prior to moving to New York City, but was excited to hear that that was happening and knew that people had been organizing for years around anti-budget cut, anti-austerity measures, and that sort of culminated into Occupy, the call for occupying Wall Street by adbusters. And the whole thing was really interesting. I didn't know quite what to make of it, but was curious. And I didn't really get involved in meetings or in actual organizing for a while because in a lot of ways, what I saw of Occupy in Zuccotti Park was unfamiliar. I was still struggling with my own identity, my radical understanding of history and politics, and trying to make sense of where I fit in. And a lot of people who identify as people of color, women of color, Teresa touched on this, but immigrants continue to struggle to find their place in Occupy. And many of us, despite that, are still participating and were involved in organizing for May Day. So, in September and October, November, I went to several rallies and marches and still was like, I'm not sure where I fit in. I really want to do work in Occupy. There's incredible potential. This space is so amazing. So many activists with incredible personal histories and experience and politics are really involved, and I should really check it out. And so a friend was interested in organizing with May Day, and so I thought, oh, that'd be a good space because of the radical history of May Day with the 1886 Haymarket massacre and riots, and 2006, the immigrant rights movement, the upsurge of immigrants demanding for their rights, demanding visibility, and really taking a stand against the oppressive racist state. And so it was exciting. It was exciting to go to that space, to go to the meetings. And I was thrilled to be there. I was thrilled to be learning and meeting all these different people. I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Just give me a minute. Try to be as eloquent as Penny, Teresa, and Amy.
You're doing great.
Oh. And in talking about these experiences, these are my lived experiences, so I really shouldn't struggle with this. But I want to articulate this in a way that addresses all the things that I went through that are really important to me. So like Teresa said, the meetings were really large at first, and it was really amazing. There are people from immigrant rights groups, from labor, from community-based organizations, and then Occupy folks who were from all over the country, all over the world, which was phenomenal. But at the same time, there was a lack of representation and active participation of communities of color, of rank-and-file members. Amy is one of the few rank-and-file activists, agitators from any union that really stuck it through and participated throughout the Occupy movement in general, not only just the May Day meetings, which is really telling in a lot of ways. And there's a reason for that, and I think people who still are really involved in Occupy and want to see this actualized into being a true social movement recognize the importance and the value of impacted communities, people who face oppression and state repression, violent state repression daily, need to be in that space if it's going to be anything real. So it was difficult working in a room with mostly young, privileged, like myself, educated people, mostly white, and who have different political analyses, different experiences, and it was we learned a lot. We worked through a lot of conversations. We pushed through a lot of conversations of race, class, sex. Not as much as we should have. But the people who stayed in that room stayed for a reason, because they were ready to take on those difficult conversations. So a lot of that came about when the conversation of general strike began, which was a really interesting phenomena in Occupy and in the May Day meetings, because a lot of people's perceptions in that room, mostly young, privileged, mostly white, felt, and with the belief that they're anarchists, that's their political alignment, felt that it was really important that we have a general strike. That's the only way we're going to challenge capitalism, is to call for that and to re-invoke that really radical history, but without understanding that you can't have a general strike. You cannot organize for general strike if you don't have the active participation of workers. At one point, people were bringing that up. The people who stayed in that room, who had those tough conversations, were the ones, like Teresa, like Amy, like myself, like Nastaran, were the ones who were saying, look, this doesn't make sense. We should really think this through. And at one point, one woman at a meeting spoke up and said, why are we still having a conversation about organizing? We already called for general strike. So that was tough. That was tough. And those people ended up leaving the room and organized outside of that space, outside of the Occupy Wall Street May Day meetings, and created a collective called Strike Everywhere, who were the ones who passed out that inane literature about organizing for general strike devoid of workers and immigrants, essentially. Which is unfortunate because, like Teresa mentioned, if we're really going to challenge capitalism, if we're really going to take on this state and recreate the world that we want to, everybody needs to be there. We all need to work together. And they weren't willing to have those conversations. And that's the reality of Occupy, that people have different political histories, political understandings, historical positionings. And if you're not willing to stay in that room and tough it out, then how are we going to figure it out? so that was really interesting. So we ended up, working the language so it would be a general strike and more. So it's just like the nebulous more. People can sort of fit in there where they can, and that was the tagline under legalize, organize, unionize. And so at that point, Occupy people were really organizing with the 4x4 coalition, and that became predominantly what we did, is work with those groups, which is really, really wonderful that people, again, like mostly young, privileged people in Occupy really did understand the importance of working in coalition with these groups and for having one unified march. Not a lot of people thought about that. People were really excited to work in coalition, and were more so just concerned about how labor in particular is really institutionalized in a lot of ways, and we're unsure about how we're going to work together in terms of, like, Occupy tries to function with horizontal democracy and has, the hand signals. I'm sure people know, like, approving of things is this, and down twinkling if you're not comfortable, and in the middle if you're okay. And there's all these methods that we use in meetings to, engage and to relate to one another and to participate. And that's really different from how labor and community-based organizations have meetings. And so trying to make sense of that was a really interesting experience. And everyone was open. Occupy was open in a lot of ways in the 4x4 coalition, immigrant rights groups, the May 1st coalition, community-based organizations, and labor. People were really looking to make space for each other, and to really work together and to see each other's needs through. So let's see. So yeah, it was amazing conversations people had. We really did struggle to figure out, not all of the people, not the 150, which did dwindle down through the months, but a lot of people that are involved in the May Day meetings and Occupy couldn't all come to the 4x4 meetings. Most of the people in the 4x4 meetings were from an organization, were representing an organization, and they understood, because they've been doing this work for years, that they would, go back to their organizations and talk about what happened in the 4x4 meetings, and Occupy still didn't really know what to do with that because we don't have leaders, we don't have representatives, which in some ways was silly, because you need to trust each other, you need to understand that not everyone can be at the room at the same time, working together, having those conversations and making those decisions. As much as you'd like it to be that way, it just doesn't make sense. And also recognizing that I was in that room at that time. I was able to go to the early 4x4 meetings, to engage with longtime labor leaders and activists in New York City, amazing immigrant rights organizations, leaders, people have been doing community-based organization for years. I was able to be in that space and engage with those people and really learn, because I was unemployed at that time, and because I'm young and privileged. So I think that that's something in Occupy that, not everybody can make 4-hour meetings twice a week and actively participate in the movement. It's not accessible in a lot of ways. So that was something that I personally grappled with. And I think that it helped to reflect and to work with people who had that same understanding and recognizing, to work through those difficult conversations and to really work in coalition. Yeah, so I wanted to briefly talk about how with the legalize, unionize, organize messaging came up. It was really an amazing conversation. People wanted to do, that was proposed, and people wanted to do legalize, organize, occupy. And my friend Rose and Rose works for the UAW, and her family has long been involved in social movements and in labor, and I'm pretty new to labor, but strongly feel that it's an incredible radical base to work from. We really pushed back against that. We were really frustrated. We felt that there was a lot of anti-union sentiment. People didn't really understand why it was important to have rank and file members, to really try to involve them in our May Day planning. And I was really tired of self-serving rhetoric in Occupy. I was really tired of there's this video online for decolonizing Oakland, and this woman is talking about, when they're putting forward this proposal, how she's really fascinated with Occupy's obsession with the capitalist idea of branding, in that we have to throw Occupy and splash it everywhere, without recognizing its colonial history, without recognizing that language is colonial. But that, in the same sense, language is transformative. Like we can rework that and reshape that. And so we blocked it. We blocked legalize, organize, occupy, because it took out unionize and it took out legalize, organize. Yeah, it took out unionize and it replaced it with occupy. And in a sense, we won that battle. People really listened, and I was really surprised. It's a difficult thing to block something in an Occupy meeting. People are not really, after you sit through 5 meetings, 4 hours each, and you come to this final decision and somebody blocks it, you know, that's me. It was tough, but I'm really proud of that moment, and proud of everybody in that space who really fought for that, and really did listen. The people who stayed in that room to the end, I was really excited about that. So. I guess I want to conclude with where Occupy Wall Street is. I didn't really get to touch on the Immigrant Worker Justice Working Group that I'm really involved in. It's an amazing, amazing working group, one of the few working groups that actually works in Occupy currently. Occupy has always been nebulous, but a lot of working groups have sort of fallen apart. We don't have a centralized organizing body anymore. There's no spokes council. There's no General Assembly currently. People are trying to figure that out, but a lot of that fell apart because of internal dynamics, because of the complexities of that space and the difficult conversations many people weren't willing to have. And so IWJ has withstood all of that, and on May Day, we did a immigrant worker justice tour, and I think that was a really awesome part of May Day, where, because we work with existing worker centers, immigrant rights groups, unions, people, impacted communities who are at the forefront of this. We still have a lot of reflecting and work to do. It's still mostly like organizers who are in IWJ, but there are rank and file workers who come to our meetings, and it's expanding every day, which is awesome. But we did a tour on May Day of Capitol Grill, which is with the Restaurant Opportunity Center. They're looking to organize there, fighting against wage theft and discrimination. We went to Chipotle to support the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and the Community Farm Worker Alliance. We went to the office. Why Nastaran isn't here is she's supporting a woman named Pat, who is part of the Domestic Workers United, and she's going through this court case. Her employer had abused her. It's been years they've been fighting this battle. So that's where Nastaran is today. But we went to the man's office, Mark, I forget his last name, but the employer went to his office to protest and to support Pat. And we went to a terrible bank, an evil, terrible bank, one of many, that has financial ties to Corrections Corporation of America and the GEO Group, Wells Fargo, to highlight the fact that they invest in the detention and the discrimination of immigrants. So it was really amazing, and it really showed Occupy and New York City that Occupy, there are people in Occupy who understand the importance of supporting immigrant communities and workers, and highlighting those struggles and showing that if we're going to win, if we're going to do anything, we need to we need to support their lead. We need to support those communities organizing autonomously and understand that we can't make decisions for them. So it was really awesome to stand in solidarity and support them on that day. So very briefly, I just want to, I outlined 3 points for the future of Occupy, what needs to happen. So Occupy has incredible potential if the movement is actualized with the inclusion, and not for the sake of diversity, but the full and autonomous and integrated participation of exploited populations, which means that OWS takes an explicit anti-racist, anti-sexist, and anti-oppression stance, in addition to its anti-capitalist focus, and while also understanding that we shouldn't romanticize oppression and oppressed people, and have those difficult conversations. And then 2, we movement build outside of Manhattan and do some ground-up base building via supporting the work of borough occupies. There's a lot of borough occupies that are doing some awesome work in their communities, and Occupy-affiliated groups, as well as existing groups in those communities. Invest in organizing, community organizing, skill-wise and in practice, and engage with communities in meaningful ways that do not detract from their agency and histories. And that we actively educate ourselves and address theory in our action, and then have some time to reflect, because these are really difficult times, and if we don't really talk about it and think about how we internalize a lot of oppression, how we internalize racism and sexism, if we don't work through that, then how can we change it outside of ourselves? So thank you. And that is what I have to say about Occupy and my experiences.
Good morning, everyone. The tall one is here. Hi, I'm Amy, and I just want to second what everybody said. It would be nice if I just seconded and sat back down and go back to eating Danishes, but this is an incredible panel, and I did have the pleasure. Yes, I'm going to use my atrium voice because my outdoor voice is too loud for a microphone. But it's been a pleasure to sit in. I mean, we were in meetings for 5 months planning May Day. 5 months of meetings that were hours and hours long, meetings that were louder. Okay, meetings that bordered on hostile to working class people, meetings that bordered on hostile to people of color, and not in an openly racist name-calling way, but in a clueless, not understanding the way the world really works kind of way. Thank you. Not fully grasping the impacts of segregation, of racial oppression, of class oppression. And so I really give it to the women on this panel for sticking in there. Tishi's heroic blocking of that ridiculous retreat from unionization was, it was nothing short of heroic. And I really Teresa coming to those meetings, I just felt like this woman is like a veteran and she is not getting the respect that she deserves. You know what I mean? People should just shut the F up and listen to what she has to offer. And it was hard. It was hard to sit through those meetings and try to be respectful and try to be, have a spirit of friendship. And, we had a commitment at the beginning of the meetings to recognize good intent, I think, or believe good intent, so that, we come to the meeting with the belief that we all are on the same page with the same anti-capitalist goals, and not get so frustrated that people, who are predominantly white just don't understand the racial realities in this country and have a lot to learn from the people who struggle through that every day. So that, that was a long thank you for, and Nastaran, I wish Nastaran was here because she's just a bully who doesn't take shit from anyone. And really, I spoke at May Day at the final rally, and the only reason was because she would not let it go. She wouldn't let it go that I was the one rank and filer who just came and came and came and came and came with my 14-month-old son to 4-hour meetings where nobody offered childcare. Nobody thought to say we should offer childcare for working women to be able to come to these meetings. And Nastaran made sure that I got 30 seconds to get up and say something at the end of the rally. So she is a missed presence. So to say something about what I was actually asked to come here and talk about, OWS was a huge, huge windfall for the labor movement because it openly talks about class in a way that the labor movement refuses to. My union talks about us all being middle class, and that's a lie. We might have what's considered sociologically a middle class level of consumption, but when you go to work, you are nothing. I now have to work every Saturday in retaliation for union activity. I was transferred involuntarily because of union activity. We are told we are stupid. Institutionally, we are told we are stupid every day. And that is working class reality in this country right now. And unions are so phenomenally under attack. And the rollbacks are incredible. My union contract, they want us to lose job security. They want us to be at-will employees. Why am I going to pay union dues if I'm an at-will employee? Healthcare, they want us to pay for the first time for premiums. Even though we now pay almost $7,000 a year out of pocket, they now want us to pay another $10,000 because of premiums and because of rollbacks and services. The assault is absolutely incredible, and OWS came out and said, you know what? There's a group of people in this country that are parasites that are living off the work of the rest of us. And that is something that the labor movement was probably the institution that benefited the most from in this country. And I think that there was also the relationship. If we were on Facebook, the relationship between OWS and the labor movement would be, it's complicated. There's so many problems. There's a lot of love, but there's a lot of problems too. And I think that there was a sense from the trade union leadership, and forgive me if I say the unions when I'm really talking about the highest levels of national leadership in their opinions of the struggle, they have an attitude, I think, that they were glad that somebody was out in the streets taking direct radical action and sort of saying, we don't care about the laws because we have a moral imperative, because they won't do that around our contracts. They won't do that around our actual, our workplace issues. But my union, this isn't to say that my union did not put substantial resources toward Occupy, and actually had 25 members in my bargaining unit sleep out at least one night at Zuccotti as part of a rally, a joint rally that we did in early October. So there have been very, very positive and fruitful collaborations that have happened. And the only reason that's possible is not because our leadership is so enlightened, but it's because the membership was enormously sympathetic to both the tactics and the message of Occupy. And there was a sense, and that reality has actually ramped up the tension in a lot of unions, because people are sort of saying, like, well, why not us? Why not us? Why are we not occupying our central offices and the business, the business offices and the call centers? Why aren't we taking that level of direct action where we actually work? So I think that's been one of the effects. It has breathed new life. It has opened up people's imagination to new possibilities and raised expectations in sometimes uncomfortable ways for the trade union leadership, and sometimes in uncomfortable ways for us when we realize that we're not being led in that direction around our own struggles. On the OWS side, there are complications that come from, as someone I think Teresa really hit the nail on the head when she said, history didn't start on September 17th. And I think that because of the explosive nature of Occupy and the way that it captured people's imagination and spawned, thousands of copycats around the country, and really did have a broadness to it, there's a belief that we can do anything. If we call for a general strike, it's going to happen because, September 17th, y'all didn't think we could do anything, and we did. So because you don't think we can do this, it means we can. This kind of bizarre inverse logic. But I think sometimes we've confronted a sense, and I feel like we're all on the same team in terms of what we were approaching May Day with. There's almost a sense that it's good to not understand this stuff. It's all about tactics. It's all about the next action that escalates things. It's not about, and there is a theory that's out there, but nobody will claim it as their politics. Nobody will come in and say, I am an anarcho-syndicalist and I believe X. I am a whatever, I don't know. I believe in the theory of the precariat and blah, blah. People don't espouse their political beliefs, but there's very much a politics at work in Occupy. There's a de facto politics where people are saying it's all about transparency and democracy and whatever, but we showed up to a meeting one time and found out that the structure of the meeting had been changed. There was no vote. It just happened because the people who ran facilitation decided it would happen, and you don't vote. So unless you are willing to stand up like Tishi did and block something, which is an incredibly unpopular thing to do and kind of poo-pooed, you're not gonna, and then there's no formal space for political discussion. So it all winds up being discussions of tactics. So I think that there was a desire, especially around May Day and around the call for a general strike, to because part of the politics are, we don't deal with mainstream institutions. They're all corrupt. Okay, that's accurate. They're all controlled by the corporations. I mean, a lot of the analysis is right on the money, but then the conclusions you come to where we don't engage. We're not going to engage with elections. We're not even going to comment on them. We're not going to engage with the formal structures of unions. We're just going to go around them because, when we set up the occupation in Zuccotti, rank and file members came. That was totally true. I mean, the rank and file committee, which I was part of, was formed by people sitting at a table with a pile of hard hats and union literature on it, and people would just come up and sign. And so we just started calling people from that list and having working group meetings, and that was how we formed. So it's true that union members did very much come to Occupy. But in building for May Day, the idea that you could just, quote, go to the rank and file or go to the community was mistaken. And that is because the level of organization of the working class in this country, as you all know as labor studies people, is crap. is incredibly, incredibly thin and weak where it does exist. So there aren't these vibrant networks of working class people, either at the workplace. I mean, I think in the communities there tends to be more, but there wasn't I didn't feel that there was a serious attempt to really do outreach. People would talk about it, but outreach was messaging. Outreach was flyers. Outreach wasn't like in-depth conversations where you listened and learned people's issues and really got to know what kind of movement it would take to bring people together at the same table. Instead, there's the elevation of diversity of tactics where it's like, everybody go do something different, and that's really empowering because nobody's telling you what to do. Which, I'm sorry, did people miss the last sentence that I said? Well, there's this elevation of the idea of diversity of tactics, which is a way of avoiding big strategic discussions about what is the way forward, and it becomes a cop-out for having to listen to things that are uncomfortable, like race and class and all these types of things. So you just get to do your own thing and feel great about it, and everybody is like, yay you and yay me. But what about the fact that we live in a predominantly non-white city and we're sitting in a room of 95, at least 95% white folks? And I love my white folks, don't get me wrong, but what do you do about that? How do you actually bridge a historic gap when you have this movement that has a huge potential? What are you doing with that? And I think that there are a few places those conversations really did happen and have continued to attempt to happen. But you can kind of see in the meetings, like there's a cluster of people that are really banging away at that, and the rest of the people who are kind of like, good, yeah, go form an affinity group about that. As if race doesn't affect every single person in the room. As if the ramping up of racism in our society has not been part of the total tanking of the working class movement in this country. So I think that there is a tension there about an unwillingness to engage with the big ticket issues, as I like to call them. So I think that people also didn't understand in that situation where you can't just go to the rank and file, you do need to deal with the leadership. And I had a very, very unpleasant experience with this, which I will give you the short version of. It's keeping you interested that I occasionally drop out, right? What did she say?
Maybe if you held the mic, Amy.
So I work for a union. They take me off the load. I'm a technician, but they would take me off the load a day or two a week to go to Occupy meetings and, continue to keep our issues alive in the movement. And I was invited to a meeting with someone in my local, I won't name names out of the feelings of loyalty I do have to my union, to talk about May Day. And the basic message I got was, you can't talk about May Day to our members. May Day is a communist holiday, and we in this room might be smart enough to talk about it and understand the importance of it, but you cannot talk to the ordinary CWA member about it. And that was I came with a list of things that I thought we could do as a project, and it was like, wow, okay, I just got told that my brothers and sisters are basically Tea Partiers or too stupid to understand their own interests. So I thought that was very hard. That was hard for me to hear, as you can imagine, especially because I do talk about May Day at work. And my shop, people were so angry when they found out that this is what the national leadership thought of them, that my shop, we all wore red. This was actually a week after I got transferred, but people all wore red on May Day, which was incredible. They didn't go on strike, but most people who were born in the US, they had no idea what May Day was, or they thought they were like, Maypole, is that what you're talking about? Like dance, or like tanks in China, like the big military parades. They didn't understand that it was born in this country and about the 8-hour day, which we're still fighting to preserve. So I think that was, that was part of the issue, that tension that I'm talking about, where there is a view of us like we're too stupid to fight for our own interests. And I think it comes from the fact that we have a top-down culture in the labor movement in this country, and a lot of time the attitude is like, you people don't jump when we tell you to jump, so you must be stupid, you must be Republican, you must not understand, as opposed to, I don't want to jump when someone says jump. Like, I want to decide if I want to jump. I want to have a discussion about jumping. And then I want to democratically decide if jumping is the right move for us at this point. So, I mean, that's kind of my MO as a activist in the union, is like participation, bottom-up democracy. And that really jives with the message of OWS. That's where you really have a coming together of the message of OWS and the kind of workplace organizing that I am involved with. So I will wrap up because I'm seeing the little piece of paper that says to wrap up. I just want to say my final remarks would be about May Day itself. May Day itself was great. I thought it was very, very successful. I mean, there were a lot of us that were like high-fiving, being like, no more meetings, yay, we're tired of meeting. We still go to meetings, though. But it was interesting because OWS, there was this frustration a lot in the May Day planning meetings where it was like, why are we talking about what was called the Solidarity March, which people kind of treated like it's this vanilla, like legal action, and oh, it has to be legal because of status and deportations. It's just so inconvenient for me wanting to glitter bomb. And so this march actually turned out to be the crowning moment of the day. I mean, it was the best part by far and the most successful by everybody's assessment, that the Solidarity March brought together the broadest range of people and was the thing that kind of captured the spirit of the early Zuccotti days, where there was a feeling of the crossover between younger people, trade unionists, people coming in from the boroughs. It did kind of recapture that. And interestingly, a lot of the direct actions that people had been talking about and the kind of the attempt to reoccupy a space or to have a large direct action didn't really take off and didn't really galvanize people. And I found that to be very, very interesting in terms of the future of Occupy and who continues to identify with Occupy. There are a lot of like ordinary people who don't go to 5-hour meetings, don't drag their children out on a weeknight to a 5-hour meeting, who came out on May Day because they identify with the openly anti-capitalist message of the movement. So I think that in order to move forward, we have to deepen our roots, like everybody else up here talked about, and self-activity in the workplace, rank-and-file self-activity, is what is going to move things forward. And when I was hired by the union, I said, we can't ask Occupy to fight for us if we're not willing to fight for ourselves. So how do we actually mobilize our members? How do we educate our members? Has got to be the mission. So I guess I will wrap up with that. And again, thanks to everyone for putting this together.
So thank you to our panel. I'm going to take questions and comments from the floor. A lot of really important themes emerged in all of their comments today, and I'm sure you guys have interesting things to say. And I think the way we're going to do it is take 3 or 4 questions and comments. If you could please keep them brief, and then we'll go back to the panelists, and we'll try to do that a couple of times. Mike has the mic.
The end. Nothing but tactical stuff.
I think many of the comments were very helpful in explaining the problems in organizing this May Day. But in some ways, there's 2 sides to this. That is, in terms of labor unions, I don't think hardly any of the unions managed to meet the pitifully small commitment of people that they made to the march. On the other hand, they all paid the money they said they would, in fact paid 90% of the expenses of May Day, and left the May Day Coalition $25,000 to the good for next year. Then there's the question of who showed up. Well, from what I could tell when I was there, whether the people were immigrants or native-born or college students or non-unionized workers, the overwhelming majority of the participants were in fact workers. And I think that's an important thing to note about this May Day. So I would appreciate comments on that.
I didn't hear the first part. I didn't understand. Do you guys understand?
I guess the thing to do is for people just to come and because it's a big room. And we'll take 2 more, just line up and here we go.
Thanks for the presentation. I have a kind of comparison with a small progressive Midwestern college town where I was knee-deep in the Occupy movement, and we had the same problems with May Day because the Occupy movement developed the way it was going to develop, the people who showed up, and they were mostly the kind of anarcho-primitivists who live in a certain neighborhood, and the same issues of privilege came up over and over again. And two of the things that I dealt with personally was my own kind of snark towards them, and that, like, I'm the old labor movement guy, you guys don't know what you're doing. But I had to temper that with the response I got from some very intelligent and well thought out people who said, you think we should do things the old way, how's that working out for you? And in Indiana, where we're rolling back labor rights, and probably with the next election cycle, we're going to roll up the carpet on every other progressive right that's left in the state, my response was, I guess it's not working out too good. Maybe I can listen a little bit to some new ideas and some new ways of doing things. And I kind of learned the painful way that I can still listen. So that was important to me. But two real specific things about the general strike. We had to talk about the general strike. And I suggested that you do have to talk to some working people and try to get them to not go to work and withhold their labor. That's what a general strike is. And where we went with that discussion was one thing that I brought up. We had a great session, a long session, about using a quote from Emma Goldman. And when you bring up Emma Goldman with this crowd, my God, now you're talking. Hey, Emma. And she has a great quote from, and the source is escaping me, but about the 8-hour day, and how she had originally dismissed the 8-hour day as a reformist, concession, until she talked to some working people who explained to her that they needed the 8-hour day first. Before they could do anything else, they needed to stop being forced to work 13 and 14 hours a day. They needed to have 8 hours to read literature, to discuss amongst themselves, and that was really, really effective. Taking Occupy Bloomington members down to a picket line and just go talk to the workers, right? And the one other one was with the general strike. What we ended up doing was having a long discussion about and formulating a list about what you could take to people, because most of the people worked in the service sector, what you can take into a workplace that people could do other than going on strike. Slowing down and things like that in the workplace. So those are the type of things that we tried to do.
Mike is wrapping people up quickly just because we only really have about 12 more minutes in here. So I'm going to take everybody who's on this line and then throw it back to them. So if you want to get up there and keep your comments short, please do it.
Emphasis on short here.
Emphasis on short.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. That was awesome, and thank you for your organizing work. I'm Betsy Leander Wright. I've been studying other moments when anarchists and other activists and labor have come together, like the 2008 conventions, and I'm really struck by something you saw that I saw, where the first point of difficulty in working together is group process and organizational structure. Like, does everybody have to come? Voting versus blocking consensus. So my questions for you is, first of all, what were the immigrant groups bringing in as the expected way of making decisions, way of doing meetings? And second of all, did you come to some places that everybody could agree on, some processes that worked for the rank and file union folks, worked for the immigrant groups, worked for the occupiers?
Amy Bromson, UAW Local 7. This is a question directed to you, Amy. I know that the Occupy movement did not begin on September 17th, but neither did rank and file opposition movements in the CWA 1101 and what is now 1109. And that if you look back at your own history, they had citywide rank and file groups that helped lead the fight back during the 7-month strike in '71. They had newsletters coming out every single month before that. And are you working on something like that? Because that's one of the things that contributed to the limited success of the '71 strike.
Good morning, everybody. This is Rob from Take Back the Land, and I'm going to direct this at Teresa a little bit. I know her, and it's a little bit of a criticism of May 1st, but I think a lot of you touched on it and you recognize this as an issue. To me, there seemed to be that organizing component missing, and I'm wondering if space is being created for union folks, organizing, folks from the community groups and folks from Occupy to be in a space to talk about doing real outreach. knocking on doors to, to attract people that are directly affected by the issues that we're talking about. And I think it's the same criticism, Teresa, for the week of actions that followed. And I was involved in a lot of that organizing, but I had to step back because it wasn't real organizing. It was more mobilizing.
My wife and I were involved in Occupy Fort Lauderdale's labor outreach group, and we still are. We initiated what turned out to be an excellent and successful May Day program only because of the central involvement of the Unitarian Church in Fort Lauderdale. We're in a small community and a right-wing community and a tourist community with in a right-to-work state with a low level of labor involvement. I would ask what relevance, if any, does the religious community have to play in the May Day activities?
Thank you all so much for your great questions, and I'm very sorry that we don't have more time, and I hope you can come up and talk to people individually if you have more to say. I'm going to ask that we go in the reverse order in terms of answering questions, so Amy can take up the questions she wants to, and then Tishi can come in, and then Teresa can finish this off.
Okay. The question about the money and the membership situation, I studiously avoided the financial working group. I'm partially because I work, I have to work for a living, and I'm not a paid staffer, so I didn't have time to invest in that. But there was actually a lot of discussion about the resistance of unions to give money who were asked. And the list of endorsers versus the list of people who paid money, there's a pretty big disparity there. Like, I know my union endorsed at the last minute, gave no money, and did not have a contingent. So that was very, very disappointing, and there's a lot of members who know that and are disappointed. And it's great that unions have put material resources toward things. That is fantastic, because it's one thing that they have that a lot of other people don't, and I think it's a very good use of members' money. So it's great, and I'm very glad to hear that we're in good shape for next year, because things don't look like they're getting better anytime soon. So it's an investment. It's a well-placed investment, better than any money you could put on elections. The thing about the 71 strike, because no one else is going to probably answer that, I talk about the 71 strike all the time. And one of the issues that I face as a rank-and-file activist is that reform caucuses are generally electoral reform caucuses. So there was this big reform caucus in 1101 that swept the elections back in November and came into office in January and are so much better than the previous executive board that got booted out. And just on the fact that they don't treat the union like their personal ATM machine is a big step forward. But they also, the depth of the reform movements is often pretty shallow. And you see this all over the place. You see this in TWU. It's not entirely true about 1101, but how are they going to move forward? What do they reproduce to replace themselves? Because you're talking about the best shop floor leaders not being in the shops anymore. So what do they leave behind? How deep is their culture? And how much is it a substitutionist thing where it's like, if we could, and I hear this all the time, if we could just get the leaders out, if we could just get some better people in there, then things would go better. And everybody you look at wound up in office because they had that agenda when they got in office 10, 20 years ago. And so the depth of rank-and-file self-organization, I think, is critical. And yes, I write newsletters, and yes, I am very much oriented on that element of things.
I wanted to briefly comment on the comment about the gentleman talked about the general strike and how that went down in May Day in New York City. It was really, I talked about it briefly before, but in particular, people kept talking about the idea of a general strike and how it can be, like language, the idea of a general strike can be transformative. And a lot of friends and I were talking about how ideas and abstractions don't move people necessarily and don't produce material gains. Like, if people went on general strike, they would lose their jobs in New York City. They would get fired. They wouldn't be able to pay for things. But at the same time, like, a general strike could be such a strong force. And that's where the conversation of organizing comes in, which is something that a lot, IWJ in particular, and just a lot of individuals with that kind of political analysis of we need to engage with impacted communities and organize with them in solidarity with them and reach out and not constantly have 4-hour meetings 5 days a week in Manhattan, which is really inaccessible to a lot of people. I mean, people go to Manhattan to work mostly, but that's it. They work and then they leave. They don't want to work and then work again to make sense of their livelihoods outside of work. They'd rather be enjoying the other 8 hours they have to live. And so there are some people who are looking to do organizing through Occupy, and there's some new models that are being developed. And a couple friends and I, all labor people, we all work for unions, are doing a project in Brooklyn. We've been doing it for since actually November. We've been organizing and going door to door, and it's like a union. It's very similar to like union organizing, but we've modified it, going door to door and saying like, "Hi, I'm Tishi. This is so and so. We're from Occupy, and we're just going around to folks in your neighborhood to hear what people think about Occupy and to see if people are interested in getting a meeting together." And the idea being that people come to, on their own terms, come to a meeting. And talk about issues in their community. It's very, very loose, and it's been working really amazingly. One of the people organizing that lives in an apartment building in Brooklyn where they door knocked in all the apartments in his building, and people had a lot of tenants issues. Urban America is the company that owns the building, and they are really, really corrupt organization. They're really corrupt building owners, and there's a lot of like incredibly intense financial ties. They're incredibly racist. So that building in particular has been organizing around those issues, and it did come out of our organizing efforts going door to door, and under this like dual integrated labor organizing Occupy model, which we've been developing. So we do want to try to implement that in some other ways, but that's still a larger conversation we need to have, and with the larger Occupy movement. So.
Okay, well, you know, we've been sounding extremely optimistic here, right? You know, and we're optimistic because we just finished having a wonderful historic May Day. But let's be real. On May the 2nd, we didn't end immigrant attacks. We didn't stop unemployment. We didn't cancel the student debt. You know, we didn't stop foreclosures. You know, the problems are immense. And the response by the movement to these problems is not enough. And while we're optimistic about what happened on May Day, we don't know where the Occupied Wall Street movement is going to go. And we don't know if it's played its course. I really don't know if we can say that, you know. We do know that there's some great activists and there's some good work still going on. But, you know, as a whole, we don't know if it's going to survive. And we don't know what the next steps are going to be. I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but I'm going to say this. You know, when you were talking about the money that one of the brothers raised a question about, you know, these 4x4 meetings were mainly held in the morning, and it was sort of irritating to many of us because it meant then that the only ones who could go were those that were full-time activists that meant they were poor, or the nonprofits, or the staff labor people. And in the evaluation meetings after May Day, we had 1 or 2 evaluation meetings. I didn't know if this 4x4 grouping would want to stay together, because, you know, it's a very complex grouping. And do not forget that even the immigrant rights movement, it's not just one voice. There were immigrant groups that marched that are not part of our coalition, but that always come to Union Square. That last year, when we decided as a coalition to march into Foley Square with the unions, you know, it's not easy to defend that, because at Union Square, you have flags from around the world. And at Foley Square, you mainly had U.S. flags. And some of us do not like that flag. That's a flag of slavery and war and so forth. So some of the immigrant groups that are not part of our coalition but that marched with us at Union Square decided to go ahead and march to Foley Square, but as they got close to Foley Square, they pulled out in protest of going to Union Square. And, you know, there's been a lot of history of tensions between the unions and immigrants. For decades and decades, the unions would not organize unions. would not organize immigrants, even though to organize immigrants would revive the union movement 1,000%, you know, and give it a struggle, you know, give it a fight back mood, which is so desperately needed. There's anger because unions spend how much money on re-elections of candidates that sell them out over and over, right? There's so much anger towards that. And in one of the evaluation meetings after May Day, the union members that were part of our 4x4 coalition, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for them because they stood out on a limb, they took a step forward, they were bold. But you know, one of the things that they do is they pay a consulting firm to do their work, to organize the meetings. And we're like, really? So afterwards, at the evaluation meeting, we said, if this is going to continue, we're firing. We can't fire them because we didn't hire them. But we asked that a consulting firm not be the one that convened the meetings. And one of the May 1st Coalition members, who's a union member, said, I don't want my dues to go for that. And the union brothers, who I love dearly, like I said, you know, they stood on a limb, the union brothers were saying, and they were brothers, they said, but who's going to convene the meetings? You know, who's going to send out the emails? Duh, you know, we will, you know. And so I think that this is the kind of process, you know, that they're willing to come back to. I don't know if this is going to continue. I hope so. I hope so. I think it is, because we're all going to go to the stop and frisk demo and so forth and so on. But we have a lot of work to do, sisters and brothers. We have all got to get off our tush and really, you know, pressure the unions to do what they're supposed to do, defend immigrants, you know, and let's start now to build for May Day next year. You know, that's what I think we need to do. And Rob, you are absolutely correct. We have a long way to go. It ain't easy. It ain't easy. You know, I had to leave out of town. I had a family emergency, and when I came back from to my first 4x4, the Occupied Wall Street guy who took the floor sent out the email. The draft of the email was, come party on May Day. Come have fun on May Day. And I'm like, WTF? What happened while I was out of town? Trayvon Martin had just been killed. There was no reason to party on May Day, not to mention everything else. So, you know, I had to really hit him over the head with this. Dude, you know, it's like, really, you know. But this is this was a tendency within OWS that fortunately did not prevail. Nice guys, love them to death, you know, really, you know, so we have a lot of work to do. And so, you know, build May Day next year.
Thank you again to the panel. Thanks all of you for being here.